The rain hammered against the hospital windows as William paced the sterile corridor, his usually composed demeanor cracking under the weight of uncertainty. Kate sat motionless in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across their faces, making them appear older than their years. It had been 3 hours since they arrived at Great Ormond Street Hospital, 3 hours since their world had been turned upside down. The call had come during what should have been a routine morning at Kensington Palace. William had been reviewing his schedule for the upcoming week when his private secretary's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Your Royal Highness, there's been an incident involving Prince George." The words still echoed in William's mind as he continued his restless pacing. Their eldest son, now 8 years old and full of the same mischievous energy that had once gotten William into trouble during his own childhood, had been participating in a school field trip to a local adventure park. What was meant to be an educational day outdoors had quickly turned into every parent's worst nightmare. Kate's phone buzzed softly in her purse, but she couldn't bring herself to look at it. The messages of support from family and friends felt overwhelming when all she wanted was to see her son's bright smile again. She remembered how excited George had been that morning, practically bouncing off the walls as he packed his small backpack with snacks and water. He had given her an extra long hug before leaving, something that now felt like a precious gift. The climbing wall wasn't supposed to be that high, William muttered, more to himself than to Kate. They assured us it was completely safe for children his age. Kate finally looked up at her husband, seeing the guilt and fear written across his features. "It's not anyone's fault," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Accidents happen." But this wasn't just any accident. When George had fallen from the climbing wall, he had landed awkwardly, and the paramedics who arrived on the scene had been concerned enough to rush him directly to the hospital. The initial reports were vague, mentioning possible head trauma and the need for immediate medical evaluation. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the head of pediatric neurology, had met them upon their arrival. Her calm professionalism had been both reassuring and terrifying. She explained that George was conscious but disoriented, and that they needed to run a series of tests to determine the extent of his injuries. "We're doing everything we can," she had said, her kind eyes reflecting years of experience dealing with worried parents. "The next few hours will be crucial." Those words had been spoken 90 minutes ago, and each passing minute felt like an eternity. William found himself thinking about his own childhood, about the times he had worried his parents with various scrapes and adventures. He remembered his mother, Princess Diana, sitting by his bedside when he had broken his arm during a skiing accident. The memory brought both comfort and fresh pain. Kate's mind wandered to Charlotte and Louis, their younger children, who were currently being cared for by their nanny at home. She had called to check on them twice, trying to keep her voice steady as she explained that George was having some tests done at the hospital. Charlotte, wise beyond her 7 years, had immediately sensed something was wrong. "Is Georgie going to be okay, Mama?" she had asked, her small voice trembling through the phone. "The doctors are taking very good care of him," Kate had replied, choosing her words carefully. "We'll be home as soon as we can." The hospital corridor was filled with the usual sounds of a busy pediatric ward. Children's laughter echoed from the playroom down the hall, a stark contrast to the worry that consumed William and Kate. Nurses moved efficiently between rooms, their soft-soled shoes squeaking against the polished floors. William's phone rang, causing both of them to jump. It was his father, King Charles, calling for the 3rd time since they had arrived at the hospital. William let it go to voicemail, not trusting himself to have a coherent conversation. The weight of royal duty and public scrutiny felt heavier than ever in this moment of private anguish. A young intern passed by, carrying a clipboard and wearing scrubs decorated with cartoon animals. Kate watched him disappear into a room where she could hear a baby crying. The sound triggered a flood of memories from when George was an infant, how protective and anxious she had felt during those early days of motherhood. "Do you remember when he took his first steps?" Kate asked suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. William stopped pacing and looked at her, a sad smile crossing his face. He was determined to reach that toy truck you had placed on the coffee table, kept falling down but refused to give up. "He's always been like that," Kate said, her voice stronger now. "Stubborn and brave, just like his father." The comment brought a brief moment of warmth to the cold hospital atmosphere. William sat down beside Kate for the first time since they had arrived, taking her hand in his. Her skin was cold despite the hospital's heating, and he could feel the slight tremor in her fingers. "He's going to be okay," William said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Kate or himself. "He has to be." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Dr. Martinez appeared around the corner, her expression unreadable behind her professional mask. Both William and Kate stood immediately, their hearts racing as they prepared for whatever news she might bring. "How is he?" Kate asked, the words tumbling out before the doctor had even reached them. Dr. Martinez paused, glancing between the worried parents. "The initial scans have been completed," she began, her tone measured and careful. "There are some concerns we need to address." William felt his knees go weak. The word concerns, in a medical context, carried implications that he wasn't ready to face. Kate's grip on his hand tightened, her nails digging into his palm. "What kind of concerns?" William managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Martinez gestured toward a small consultation room nearby. "Perhaps we should sit down to discuss the results. There are several factors we need to consider moving forward." The walk to the consultation room felt like a mile-long journey. Each step carried the weight of their fears and hopes. Kate's legs felt unsteady, and she was grateful for William's supportive arm around her waist. The fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder in the smaller room, and the motivational posters on the walls felt mockingly cheerful. As they settled into the chairs across from Dr. Martinez's desk, Kate noticed a small stuffed bear sitting on the windowsill. It reminded her of George's favorite teddy bear, the one he had slept with every night since he was 2 years old. She wondered if he was asking for it now, wherever he was in this maze of medical equipment and procedures. Dr. Martinez opened George's file and spread several images across her desk. The brain scans looked like abstract art to William and Kate, black and white swirls that supposedly held the answers to their son's condition. "The good news," Dr. Martinez began, and both parents leaned forward eagerly, "is that there's no sign of major structural damage to the brain. However, we have detected some swelling, which is not uncommon after this type of injury." Kate felt a mixture of relief and continued worry wash over her. The word "however" lingered in the air like a dark cloud, promising more complications to come. "What does the swelling mean for George?" William asked, his training in remaining calm under pressure serving him well despite the personal nature of this crisis. "Brain swelling after a head injury needs to be monitored very carefully," Dr. Martinez explained, pointing to specific areas on the scan images. "In most cases, it resolves naturally with proper treatment and rest. However, we want to keep George under close observation for the next 24 to 48 hours. The mention of extended hospital stay made Kate's heart sink. She had been hoping they could take George home that evening, tuck him into his own bed, and pretend this nightmare had never happened. "Can we see him?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly on the last word. Dr. Martinez nodded. "He's been asking for both of you. He's conscious and alert, which are very positive signs. However, I want to prepare you for what you'll see. He has some bruising, and he's connected to monitoring equipment that might look intimidating." William and Kate exchanged glances, both drawing strength from the other's presence. They had faced many challenges together during their relationship and marriage, but nothing had prepared them for the fear of potentially losing their child. As they stood to leave the consultation room, Dr. Martinez placed a gentle hand on Kate's shoulder. "Children are remarkably resilient," she said kindly. "George seems to be a fighter, and he has excellent medical care and two parents who love him deeply. Those are powerful factors in his recovery." The walk through the hospital corridors toward George's room felt surreal. Other families passed by, some celebrating good news, others carrying their own burdens of worry. Kate found herself studying the faces of other parents, wondering how they managed to stay strong in the face of medical uncertainty. William's mind was racing with questions and scenarios. As a future king, he had been trained to consider worst-case possibilities and plan accordingly. But as a father, he found it impossible to think beyond the next moment, the next breath, the next piece of information about his son's condition. They paused outside George's room while a nurse finished checking his vital signs. Through the small window in the door, they could see their son lying in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more vulnerable than they had ever seen him. Various machines surrounded the bed, their soft beeping creating a rhythm that would become familiar over the coming hours. Kate pressed her hand against the window, her breath fogging the glass slightly. "He looks so young," she whispered. "He is young," William replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "Too young for something like this." The nurse emerged from the room with a warm smile. "He's been asking for his mummy and daddy," she said softly. "He's going to be so happy to see you both." As they prepared to enter the room, both William and Kate took deep breaths, trying to compose themselves. They wanted to be strong for George, to show him that everything was going to be all right, even though their own world felt like it was crumbling around the edges. The door handle felt cold under William's palm as he slowly opened the door, revealing their son and whatever challenges lay ahead. The moment George saw his parents enter the room, his face brightened despite the obvious discomfort he was experiencing. A large bandage covered part of his forehead, and several monitoring wires were attached to his small body. But his eyes held the same spark of life that had always made William and Kate's hearts soar. "Mummy! Daddy!" George called out, his voice slightly hoarse but filled with relief. "I was wondering when you would get here." Kate rushed to his bedside, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment as she leaned down to kiss his cheek. The familiar scent of his hair, mixed with the sterile smell of hospital antiseptic, brought tears to her eyes that she struggled to hold back. "We came as fast as we could, sweetheart," she said, smoothing his hair away from the bandaged area. "How are you feeling?" "My head hurts a bit," George admitted, reaching up to touch the bandage before Kate gently guided his hand away. "And I feel sort of dizzy when I try to sit up. But the nurses here are really nice. They gave me ice chips to eat, and they taste like nothing but they're fun to crunch." William pulled up a chair beside the bed, marveling at his son's resilience. Even in this frightening situation, George was finding small things to appreciate. It was a trait he had inherited from both his parents, though neither William nor Kate felt particularly optimistic at the moment. "Can you tell us what happened?" William asked gently. "Do you remember the climbing wall?" George's brow furrowed in concentration, and Kate noticed how the simple act of thinking seemed to tire him. "I remember starting to climb," he said slowly. "Tommy Patterson was next to me, and we were racing to see who could reach the top first. I was winning." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he recalled the competition. "But then I reached for this blue hold that looked really far away, and I guess I lost my grip. I remember falling, but it felt like it took a really long time. Then I woke up here." The matter-of-fact way George described his accident was both heartbreaking and reassuring. He didn't seem traumatized by the experience, though Kate knew that children often processed frightening events differently than adults. A nurse named Jennifer entered the room to check George's vital signs. She had been working with pediatric patients for over 15 years, and her calm demeanor immediately put the family at ease. "How's our brave patient doing?" she asked, consulting the charts on her tablet while adjusting one of the monitoring devices. "I think I'm doing pretty good," George replied seriously. "Though I would really like to go home now. Charlotte and Louis are probably wondering where I am." Jennifer smiled at his concern for his siblings. "Well, your brother and sister will have to wait just a little bit longer. The doctors want to make sure your brain is feeling completely better before you go home." "Is my brain sick?" George asked, a note of worry creeping into his voice for the first time. Kate and William exchanged a quick glance before Kate answered. "Remember when you twisted your ankle last summer, and it was swollen for a few days? Sometimes when people hurt their heads, the brain gets a little swollen too, just like your ankle did. The doctors just want to make sure the swelling goes down before you go home." George nodded solemnly, accepting this explanation with the trust that children place in their parents. "Will I be able to play football again?" "Of course you will," William said, though he made a mental note to discuss George's future activities with Dr. Martinez. "But you might need to take a little break from climbing walls for a while." "That's okay," George said. "I think I've had enough climbing for now anyway." As the afternoon wore on, a steady stream of medical staff came and went from George's room. Each nurse and doctor was professional and kind, but the constant monitoring served as a reminder of the seriousness of his condition. Kate found herself watching the monitors that displayed George's vital signs, learning to read the rhythmic patterns that represented her son's heartbeat and brain activity. William stepped out into the hallway to take a call from his private secretary, who was handling the delicate task of managing public interest in George's condition without releasing too many details. The story had already begun to appear in some media outlets, though the palace was being careful to control the narrative. "How is he really doing?" asked his secretary, genuine concern evident in her voice. "He seems like himself," William replied, watching through the window as Kate helped George with a puzzle one of the nurses had brought. "But the doctors say the next day or two will be crucial. We're not out of the woods yet." When William returned to the room, he found George showing Kate a drawing he had made on a tablet provided by the hospital's child life specialist. The drawing depicted a stick figure family standing outside what was clearly meant to be Kensington Palace, complete with flags and guards. "This is all of us when I get to go home," George explained. "I made sure to draw Louis extra tall because he's always complaining about being the shortest." Kate laughed, despite her worry. "I think Louis will appreciate that very much." As evening approached, the hospital's atmosphere shifted to a quieter, more subdued tone. Visiting hours were ending for most patients, but as parents of a child requiring close monitoring, William and Kate were allowed to stay overnight. The prospect of spending the night in the uncomfortable hospital chairs was daunting, but neither of them considered leaving George's side. Dr. Martinez returned for her evening rounds, bringing with her the results of additional tests that had been conducted throughout the day. George was dozing lightly, exhausted by the day's events and the medications he had been given for pain management. "The latest scans show that the swelling is beginning to decrease," she reported quietly, not wanting to wake George. "This is exactly what we want to see. His cognitive responses are good, and his motor functions appear to be unaffected." William felt some of the tension leave his shoulders for the first time all day. "Does this mean he's going to be okay?" "All signs are pointing in the right direction," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "We'll continue monitoring him overnight, and if he remains stable, we may be able to discuss discharge plans tomorrow afternoon." Kate looked down at her sleeping son, noting how peaceful he appeared despite the medical equipment surrounding him. Will there be any long-term effects? Every head injury is different, the doctor explained. Some children experience temporary issues with concentration or memory, but these typically resolve within a few weeks. We'll want to follow up with regular checkups and possibly some cognitive assessments, but I'm cautiously optimistic about George's recovery. After Dr. Martinez left, William and Kate settled in for what they knew would be a long night. The hospital had provided them with blankets and pillows, though the chairs were hardly designed for comfortable sleeping. Kate pulled her chair as close to George's bed as possible, wanting to be within arm's reach if he needed anything during the night. "Do you remember when he was a baby and we used to take turns sitting up with him when he had those ear infections?" Kate whispered to William. "I remember you doing most of the sitting up," William replied with a tired smile. "You always seemed to know exactly what he needed." "I was so worried about everything then," Kate continued, her voice barely audible. "Whether he was eating enough, sleeping enough, developing normally. I thought those were the hardest parts of parenting." William reached across the small space between their chairs to take her hand. "We'll get through this too. We always do." Around midnight, George stirred and called out softly for water. Kate was at his side immediately, helping him sip from a cup with a straw. His movements seemed steadier than they had been earlier in the day, and his voice was clearer. "Are you staying here all night?" he asked, noticing his parents' makeshift sleeping arrangements. "Of course we are," Kate replied, smoothing his blanket. "We're not going anywhere until you're ready to come home with us." "Will you tell me a story?" George asked, settling back against his pillows. Kate and William had told George countless bedtime stories over the years, ranging from classic fairy tales to elaborate adventures they made up on the spot. Tonight, Kate chose to tell him about a brave young prince who went on a quest to help the people in his kingdom, weaving in themes of courage and recovery that seemed appropriate for the circumstances. As she spoke, Kate noticed George's breathing becoming deeper and more regular. The stress lines around his eyes, which had been present since the accident, began to fade as he relaxed into sleep. Even William found himself being lulled by Kate's gentle voice and the steady rhythm of the hospital monitors. The night passed slowly, punctuated by regular checks from the nursing staff and the occasional sounds from other rooms on the pediatric ward. Kate dozed fitfully, waking every hour or so to check on George. William managed slightly better sleep, though he too found it difficult to fully relax in the unfamiliar environment. Around 4 in the morning, Kate was awakened by George calling her name. She immediately sat up, alert and ready to address whatever he needed. "Mummy, I had a strange dream," he said, his voice small in the darkened room. "What kind of dream, sweetheart?" "I dreamed that I could fly, but I kept forgetting how to land properly. Every time I tried to come down, I would just keep falling." Kate felt her heart clench at the obvious connection between George's dream and his accident. "That does sound like a confusing dream. But you know what? In real life, you don't need to worry about flying or falling. You're safe here with Daddy and me." "I know," George said, though he still sounded troubled. It just felt so real. Kate spent the next 20 minutes talking quietly with George about dreams and reality, about feeling safe and being brave. By the time he fell back asleep, the first hints of dawn were beginning to appear outside the hospital windows. As morning approached, the hospital began to stir with the change of nursing shifts and the arrival of the day medical staff. Dr. Martinez appeared earlier than expected, explaining that she had been eager to check on George's progress after a full night of monitoring. The morning examination revealed continued positive signs. George's responses to cognitive tests were sharp. His balance had improved significantly, and the latest brain scans showed further reduction in swelling. For the first time since the accident, William and Kate began to believe that their nightmare might truly be coming to an end. "I think we can start discussing discharge plans," Dr. Martinez announced after completing her assessment. "George will need to take things easy for the next few weeks, but I see no reason why he can't continue his recovery at home." The news brought tears of relief to Kate's eyes, and she saw William quickly wipe at his own eyes when he thought no one was looking. George, overhearing the conversation, sat up straighter in bed with renewed energy. "Does this mean I can go home today?" he asked hopefully. "If everything continues to go well, you might be able to go home this afternoon," Dr. Martinez confirmed. "But we'll need to go over some important instructions for your parents about what to watch for and how to help you heal properly." As the medical team began preparing discharge paperwork and instructions, Kate felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The past 24 hours had tested every aspect of her strength as a mother, but seeing George's improvement filled her with hope for the future. The door to George's room opened once more, and this time it wasn't a doctor or nurse who entered. Standing in the doorway was someone whose presence would change everything about their understanding of what the next few weeks would hold. King Charles III stepped into the room quietly, his usually formal bearing softened by genuine concern and relief. Behind him came Queen Camilla, carrying a large basket filled with books, games, and treats. But it was the third figure who entered that made George's face light up with pure joy. "Granny!" George exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement as Princess Anne smiled warmly at her nephew. Anne had always held a special place in George's heart. Her no-nonsense approach to life, combined with her genuine affection for her nephew's children, had created a unique bond between them. She had been traveling in Scotland when news of the accident reached her, and she had immediately chartered a helicopter to return to London. "Well, young man," Anne said, approaching his bedside with the confidence of someone who had raised children of her own through various scrapes and adventures. "I hear you've been giving your parents quite a fright." "I didn't mean to," George replied earnestly. "I was just trying to win the climbing race." "Of course you were," Anne said with a knowing smile. "Competitive spirit runs in this family, though we might need to channel it in slightly safer directions for a while." King Charles moved to embrace both William and Kate, his relief evident in the tightness of his hug. "How has he been?" he asked quietly. "Much better than we dared hope yesterday," William replied, his voice still carrying traces of the exhaustion and worry of the past day. "The doctors say he can come home this afternoon if all goes well." Camilla unpacked the basket she had brought, revealing an assortment of items clearly chosen with care. There were several new books, including the latest adventure novel George had been wanting to read, some puzzle games that would help with cognitive recovery, and an assortment of his favorite sweets. "We thought you might be getting bored lying in that hospital bed," Camilla explained, her maternal instincts evident despite not being George's biological grandmother. Dr. Martinez returned to conduct one final examination before discharge, and she seemed pleased to see that George was alert and interactive with his extended family. His responses to her questions were quick and accurate, and his physical coordination appeared to be completely restored. "I'm very happy with George's progress," she announced to the assembled family. "The swelling has reduced significantly, and all of his cognitive and physical responses are within normal ranges. I see no reason why he can't go home today." The collective sigh of relief from the adults in the room was audible, and George himself practically bounced with excitement at the prospect of returning to familiar surroundings. "However," Dr. Martinez continued, "there are some important restrictions we need to discuss. George will need to avoid any strenuous physical activities for at least 4 weeks. No contact sports, no climbing, no bicycle riding without a helmet, and definitely no more adventure parks for the foreseeable future." George's face fell slightly at these restrictions, but Anne was quick to step in with a solution. "That just means we'll have to find other exciting things to do," she said conspiratorially. "I seem to remember that someone has been asking to learn how to drive the Land Rover around the estate." "Really?" George asked, his excitement returning. Mummy said I had to wait until I was older. Kate shot Anne a look that was part exasperation and part gratitude for the distraction. We'll discuss age-appropriate activities when we get home, she said diplomatically. The process of preparing for discharge took longer than expected, as the hospital staff needed to ensure that William and Kate understood all of the warning signs to watch for and the follow-up appointments that would be necessary. They were given detailed instructions about George's medications, activity restrictions, and emergency protocols. While the adults handled the medical paperwork, King Charles sat with George and shared stories about his own childhood adventures and misadventures. He told him about the time he had fallen from a horse during polo practice and how his own mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had insisted he get back on a horse as soon as the doctors cleared him. The point, Charles explained to his grandson, is not to avoid all risks in life, but to learn from our experiences and make better choices moving forward. George listened intently to his grandfather's words, clearly taking them to heart. So I shouldn't stop climbing things forever? Not forever, Charles replied carefully, but perhaps we should make sure you're properly trained and supervised in the future. There's a difference between being brave and being foolish. As the afternoon wore on, the hospital staff completed all the necessary discharge procedures. George was finally disconnected from the monitoring equipment that had been his constant companion for over 24 hours. The removal of the wires and sensors felt symbolic to Kate, as though they were literally untethering their son from this frightening experience. A wheelchair was brought to transport George to their waiting car, though he protested vigorously that he felt perfectly capable of walking. Hospital policy won out, but George made the journey as dramatic as possible, waving regally to other patients and staff members they passed in the corridors. "Thank you for taking such good care of our son," William said to Dr. Martinez as they prepared to leave. "We can never adequately express our gratitude. Watching children recover and return to their families is exactly why I chose this profession," she replied warmly. "George is a remarkable young man, and I have no doubt he'll make a full recovery." The journey home to Kensington Palace felt surreal after the intensity of the hospital environment. George sat between his parents in the back seat of the Range Rover, chattering excitedly about everything he wanted to do when he got home. His enthusiasm was infectious, and both William and Kate found themselves truly smiling for the first time in 2 days. "I want to see Charlotte and Louis first," George declared. "Then I want to sleep in my own bed and eat something that doesn't taste like hospital food, and play with my toys, and maybe watch a movie." "That sounds like an excellent plan," Kate agreed, though she made a mental note to ensure that George didn't overdo things in his excitement to return to normal activities. When they arrived at Kensington Palace, Charlotte and Louis were waiting with barely contained excitement. The younger children had been told that George was coming home, but seeing him actually walk through the door brought visible relief to both of them. Charlotte, ever the protective older sister, immediately began fussing over George, wanting to know if his head still hurt and whether he needed anything. Louis, typically more direct in his approach, simply hugged George tightly and announced that he had saved half of his dessert from lunch in case George was hungry. The family gathered in the sitting room, where George regaled his siblings with an only slightly embellished account of his hospital adventure. He made the nurses sound like heroes, the medical equipment sound fascinating rather than frightening, and his own experience sound far more exciting than scary. Kate watched her 3 children together and felt a profound sense of completeness that had been missing during George's hospital stay. The fear that had dominated the past day was finally beginning to recede, replaced by gratitude and a renewed appreciation for the precious nature of family. That evening, as Kate tucked George into his own bed for the first time in 2 days, he asked her a question that caught her off guard. "Mummy, were you and Daddy scared when I got hurt?" Kate considered how to answer honestly while still being age-appropriate. Yes, sweetheart. We were scared. When people we love get hurt, it's natural to feel scared and worried. But you didn't cry, George observed. Sometimes grown-ups try very hard not to cry because they want to be strong for the people they love, Kate explained. But that doesn't mean we don't feel scared or sad inside. George was quiet for a moment, processing this information. I was a little scared too, he admitted, especially when I first woke up and didn't know where I was. Being scared is okay, Kate assured him. Being brave doesn't mean you never feel scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared. As she kissed George goodnight and turned off his bedroom light, Kate reflected on the truth of her own words. The past 2 days had required more courage than she had known she possessed, not the physical bravery that George had shown, but the emotional strength to keep functioning when her worst fears threatened to overwhelm her. William was waiting for her in their own bedroom, looking more exhausted than she had seen him in years. They both sat on the edge of their bed in comfortable silence, processing the events of the past day and the relief of having their family whole and safe once again. I keep thinking about what could have happened, William said quietly. All the ways this could have been so much worse. But it wasn't worse, Kate replied, taking his hand. George is going to be fine. Dr. Martinez said children are remarkably resilient, and George proved that today. William nodded, though she could see that it would take time for the worry and fear to completely fade. I suppose this is just part of being a parent. Learning to live with the constant awareness that anything could happen to them at any moment. And learning to trust that most of the time, everything will be okay, Kate added. George will have other accidents, other challenges, but today showed us that we can handle whatever comes our way. As they prepared for bed, both William and Kate found themselves checking on their children one more time. Charlotte and Louis were sleeping peacefully, and George was curled up with his favorite teddy bear, looking exactly like the healthy, happy child he had always been. The next morning brought the return of normal routines, though with some modifications to accommodate George's recovery period. He was allowed to attend school, but was excused from physical activities. His friends and teachers welcomed him back with enthusiasm, and George found himself enjoying a brief period of celebrity status as he shared his adventure story. In the weeks that followed, the family settled into their new normal. George's follow-up appointments showed continued improvement, and gradually the restrictions on his activities were lifted. The climbing wall incident became family lore, a scary story with a happy ending that would be retold at family gatherings for years to come. Kate often thought back to those terrifying hours in the hospital corridor, remembering the feeling of helplessness and fear that had threatened to overwhelm her. But she also remembered the strength she had found in herself and in William, the way they had supported each other through their darkest moments. 3 months later, when George asked if he could sign up for the school's rock climbing club, both Kate and William felt their hearts skip a beat. But after discussing it with his doctors and ensuring that proper safety measures would be in place, they agreed. Because as King Charles had told George in the hospital, the goal wasn't to avoid all risks in life, but to learn from experience and make better choices moving forward. George's accident had taught them all something valuable about courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds that hold families together. As Kate watched her son carefully but confidently make his way up the practice climbing wall at his first club meeting, she realized that the door that had opened in the hospital had revealed not just George's recovery, but their entire family's capacity for growth and strength in the face of adversity.